Why is it so important that we do as many things barefoot as we can? What's the importance behind that?
Well, I think we first need to tackle the myth of being barefoot in a gym as being uncleanly. It's like a no-no.
And you have said you've been yelled at gyms. Hey, buddy, get your shoes on.
Oh yeah, and then I have to like punch him in the face with knowledge bombs of like, hey, listen, that research-wise, it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense.
Hey, welcome back to Bullpen Sessions. I am excited today. I have Matt Zanis joining me. Matt resides in Phoenix, Arizona. He is the doctor of human movement and an expert in human performance. He is the founder of Rooted in Movement, a company that helps athletes, coaches, and other rehabilitation providers build confidence and trust in their bodies and practices through the 5 pillars of movement: vitality, mindset, nutrition, and training. Dr. Zanis works with a broad demographic from Olympians to the highest branches of military, including Navy Special Warfare and everybody in between. His vision is to create an awareness of new ways of working with the human body in rehabilitation, performance, and coaching circles, and bring that alive through a philosophy that is rooted in movement. With a short way of saying that, Matt, is you're a PT like none other, and that's why I'm excited to have you on. We're gonna talk about what you're doing to help people take care of their bodies in a way I can tell everybody, as somebody who has heard Matt speak and gone through a little clinic with him, it's unlike anything you've seen. So I'm excited to talk about that, Matt. But before we get there, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me. You know, I was so excited to actually do this podcast with you because we connected on such a deep level when we met up here for that mastermind event up in Scottsdale. And you know, it wasn't just like the former kind of careers in baseball that brought us together. We just had some really great conversations. I'm like, man, I just need to talk to this guy more.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely, I agree. I think our conversations, for those listening in, I had Kyle on last week and we talked about his reaching beyond experiences. Matt and I were both at the one in Scottsdale, and I agree. We definitely connected on a really good level. We had some deep conversations, especially on the bus ride back from what I would call the kite surfing failure for me.
I think we all had some level. Yeah.
Let's start with your journey. Even before you got to what you're doing today as a founder of Rooted in Movement, talk about your sports journey, because you were a good athlete in high school, definitely had aspirations of playing baseball at a high level like myself. For the audience listening who doesn't have any idea who you are, tell us a little bit about Matt Zanis growing up.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, but as you're going to hear, that kind of took a different turn later on in life. But I grew up in an area of Northeast Pennsylvania where like genetics, geography, and opportunity kind of dictated your trajectory on life. So for me in particular, I grew up in a very predominant baseball family. Right, dad was a left-handed pitcher in college. My brother was a right-handed pitcher. Uncle was a catcher. My grandfather was actually drafted as a catcher by the Pirates back in the 60s. So I thought it was in my blood, right? There's that kind of genetic component of it. Grew up in an area, geography, right, where it was popular. Baseball is a pretty popular sport up in Northeast Pennsylvania. The only problem was I ended up being terrible at it. I was kind of like a genetic trash can, so to speak. But I had a really hard work ethic. And I would just, practice more, throw more, bat more, run more. The only problem was that I kept getting injured year after year, and these chronic little injuries just kind of stuck around. I couldn't wrap my head around why. Right? I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Why was I not like everybody else in my family? Right? But it was because of this hard work ethic combined with being kind of like a guy that goes rogue. I could go against the grain a lot. I ended up finding weight training in high school. Now, I don't know if this was the kind of the mindset of where you started your baseball at, but they didn't like it that baseball players were lifting weights. They thought it kind of messed up our timing of our swing and throwing and all that stuff. But I went rogue and went to our weight room and started training. And I learned really quick that if I started moving better and combined that with progressive overload of resistance training, that all these like little nagging pains and injuries kind of seemed to melt away. They went away. And it was at that moment that I started to shift course, right? My path started taking other directions. I realized I was actually a much better coach than an athlete and a much better provider than a player because I was helping out all my classmates. as well. It just kind of came natural to me. It connected with people really well and helped guide them along their movement journey. Granted, I had no idea what the hell I was doing back then. I'm like, I read this in a magazine once or online and kind of apply it to myself and see what works. And that's kind of the other piece about like what I do. Yeah, I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my degree in athletic training and actually worked for the Pittsburgh Pirates organization for a little while, but then went down to Duke for my doctorate in physical therapy. Went on from there out here to Arizona with the Cardinals, had an internship. And that's kind of how I landed in Phoenix. I fell in love with the area, knew I always wanted to move out here. So the day after I graduated, I picked up all my bags and traveled out here and actually got my first job with the PT from the PGA Tour. So I've kind of been all these different kind of high level areas of sport, and I've been able to adapt to each and every one of them because my superpower is pattern recognition. Like that's kind of the way my brain works. I'm like a puzzle guy. Like I really enjoy doing puzzles, and the human body really is the greatest puzzle that we have out there because everybody's different, right? But we all kind of abide by these same rules of physics and nature and human physiology, but it's all applied in different ways. And that's kind of where my I guess that superpower, that brain aspect comes in, where I like putting the pieces back together. And I think I see things in a novel way with movement to be able to help rebuild the confidence in the athletes and the bodies that I work with, and not even just athletes, but like the everyday soccer mom and high school kids here in Arizona.
You know, I'd love to get your view, your take on this, because you talked about discovering the weight room when you were playing baseball. And I did the same thing. You know, I came out of high school as a senior in high school. I weighed 145 pounds. Like I was not a big kid. And when I got to college at UWM, I put on 25 pounds of muscle, you know, and for most of my college career, my playing weight was about 170, 175. Gotcha. And it was I wasn't a tall pitcher, so I needed that leg strength and that power to really allow myself to compete. And what was interesting is my last year at UWM and into my time with the Milwaukee Brewers, everything was so never lift heavy. And I bought into it. So I lifted really light, especially upper body, right, as a pitcher. And I truly feel, Matt, it had a negative impact. I wasn't as strong as I was in college. And I really believe that was one thing that impacted my career in the Milwaukee Brewers organization. So I would love your take on that with the way we're seeing weight training shift in sports. Football, always been a big thing. But even like in baseball, heck, look at these guys playing golf. What is your view about weight training, lifting heavy, and how that is applied to sports today? I'd be very curious to know.
Oh, man, that's a great question because there's so many different rabbit holes we can go down with it. But I'm actually going to start this part of the conversation with a little bit of a quote. If you don't know who Mark Ripito is, he is a very, very famous strength conditioning coach. Coach a lot of power lifters as well. But he has a line that stronger people are harder to kill, which I mean, and it has a lot of merit to it, right? If you build more resiliency in the body through the muscle tissues and your ability to withstand forces and attenuate and distribute loads throughout the body, you're going to be more resistant to pain and injury, right? Because your physical body can actually handle more. Okay, but there's another component of this where you could also be strength training into dysfunction, right? Meaning you could be moving in a certain way that maybe you are aware of or you're not aware of, and it can come at like a subconscious level, and you feel like you're doing the right things. You had the great intentions of getting stronger, which is great. But if you continually use the same tissues over and over again, and you're strengthening into a pattern that may not be optimal, okay, because there really is no bad movement, right? But there are optimal movements that we could do for a specific task. If you're strength training into an unoptimal movement, you could be setting yourself up for potential injury or for pain later on in life. And that's where it's like an interesting component for me, where we start talking about this idea of like movement and exercise, right? Because I feel like there's a fine line between the two. And we go back to the intentionality piece. Like, I feel like a lot of athletes had the great intention of getting better at the sport. They had the great intention through their strength conditioning staff and through their rehabilitation staff to help keep them resistant to injury. But when it comes down to it, is a lot of the programs that you see, and mind you, I'm not trying to take shots at any of the professional organizations, but a lot of the ones that I've been in, including at the Olympic level, there's a lot of programs that are developed that are a lot more like exercise, right? Which is essentially like getting your heart rate up. Yes, you are moving your body, but it's usually like a monostructural kind of way, just kind of up, down, stuff that can be performed in a hallway or through a doorway. And it really doesn't have any translation over into what we would term functional movement, right? And that's why I love to see baseball players getting out and golfing. I don't know if you saw my golf swing, though, during that experience. It really didn't translate well. We can get into that a little bit from a mechanics and a psychology standpoint, too. We have a deep conversation about that. But it doesn't really translate over directly into performance. And that's where the movement piece comes in, right? And that's where it's taking a look at the individual and seeing what they're missing on their like spectrum of movement, and giving them the opportunity to explore these positions, these postures, these patterns that they may have not ever given their body a chance to move into. And that's where we start to really make a headway on, especially the injury risk reduction piece, by giving them more bandwidth, more robustness through exploring the human body with movement rather than just getting hot and sweaty and burning calories.
So I want you to tell everybody listening in, because you did this during your workshop with us in Scottsdale. You posed a question: what is the true definition of an athlete? And I think most people immediately went to three things: speed, size, strength, or just one's ability in a specific sport. Mm-hmm. But what, in your words, because I thought it was beautiful, what is the definition of an athlete?
Well, it's interesting, like the speed, strength, and size thing. That's because everybody sees and what we kind of we portray as the utmost elite athleticism. We see athletes banging weights in the gym and moving really fast, moving a lot of heavy load, and we just assume that they're high-level athletes. It's really interesting, though, because high-level athletes are not the people that we should be looking at from like a health perspective, because it's just like a small percentage of them that are on the far end of the spectrum of athleticism. Now, the definition of athleticism that I use is the ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or a novel task. And to that being like you could, the known and novel task piece, meaning you are in the gym, you know you're going to squat a barbell, you're going to take it down to the ground and stand back up with it. That's a known task versus a novel task. I always give the example of like an NFL lineman kind of running down the sidelines trying to catch a long ball from the quarterback, but they're staving off defenders, or trying to keep their feet in bounds. Mind you, you're trying to look over their shoulder to catch this ball and keep moving at full speed down the sideline to score a touchdown. That is a novel task because you have no idea foot position. You can step in a divot, or is there a piece of grass out of place? Are there defenders over to your right or to your left? Like, where is that sideline at? Is somebody going to throw a towel at you from the sidelines? Like when the coach, you don't know. Like there's a lot of stuff could happen. That's a very novel task. And then I like to work a lot specifically with that seamless and effortless movement piece and combining those primal movement patterns. Because to me, seamless and effortless movement is that beautiful, that natural movement that you see somebody perform because they're doing it without thinking, right? It comes naturally to them. And we as humans can visualize that. Like we know when we see shitty movement versus good quality movement. And that seamless and effortless movement is really the neurological system, right? It's your proprioception, which is essentially your balance, knowing where your joints are at in space, and your kinesthetic awareness, which is essentially knowing where your body is at in space without having to think about it. Okay, and that balance and that knowing where your body is at in space without think about it allows you to free up a lot of energy inside your body. So you're not overanalyzing, you're not overthinking like I did with my golf swing a few weeks ago, right? And I moved like a robot with, and this is somebody that, playing baseball, we definitely have some good transverse rotational plane abilities. And I just overthought it, and it caused a lot of paralysis by analysis. It was definitely not seamless and effortless movement, folks. I'm sure there's videos out there somewhere if you guys want to take a look at that. It's kind of hilarious. But yeah, so it's that seamless and effortless movement piece I like to work with. And we do that through a lot of movement exploration and through a lot of education and teaching about how your body moves. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to move from the state of like conscious incompetence, right? Where you're kind of messing up. And that's when people come to see me. Like they know that they're kind of moving in the wrong way. They've been through this roller coaster ride of pain and injury. They don't understand really what's going on in their body, but they know there's something up to this state of unconscious competence where we are moving better without having to think about it. And we're just kind of flowing through life in a natural way.
It makes me think about in sports, you look at I think in football, for some reason, Randy Moss comes to mind. When he was running routes, he made him look effortless. Like it looked like he wasn't even running fast and he was blowing past D-backs. In baseball, you look at some pitchers and it looks like they're effortlessly throwing 100 miles an hour. Is that what you're talking about when you think about that ability to do a novel task easily? These guys that just make it look effortless, but still are the fastest, throw the hardest, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely like a genetic component to that for sure. But what you see with these guys, and there's a lot of great books out there too, like the Talent Code is a great one to read up on some of the stuff. He talks a lot about like football players, meaning soccer players from around the world. But what you see with these specific individuals is that they were given the opportunity early on in life to experience a lot of different movement patterns, right? They're put in different sports, they're put in different activities like dance and martial arts, and then they just so happen to specialize in a sport later on in life that they made themselves really good at. Maybe they were genetically gifted with the size and the strength like a football player to handle a lot of that, and they're kind of built for it. You just start to see it unfold kind of later in life, right?
And I agree. There's probably definitely genetics in there too. But for the people listening in who are parents, you bring up actually a really good point. Does that validate then when you have a child who is exploring sports at a young age? Is it a good idea to get him or her involved in many different sports at a young age? Because that could help build up that pattern recognition.
Yes. So it gives that opportunity for movement exploration, right? And kids are very malleable at that age. Like we can soak in like sponges a lot of different novel stimuli, a lot of different information, and then assimilate it. Like we know that our brains are really plastic in nature. Like it starts to assimilate a lot of information. We can still do it as adults in life, later in life, but kids, it just happens a lot faster, right? And different movement practices, we'll call them that, like dance and martial arts and gymnastics are probably three that come to mind. They teach a lot of spatial and body awareness, right? And that kind of serves as the foundation, I believe, to being able to have a higher level of athletic potential later on in life, okay? Because what it's really doing, if you think about martial arts, wrestling would probably be another good one here, and gymnastics and dance, there's a lot of like tumbling and moving your body around and getting knocked to the ground and learning how to maneuver in an environment that's not necessarily engineered and structured like a gym would be. Like it's very structured, right? So what that does is actually works on the vestibular and the visual system inside the brain, which is essentially housing our balance centers. Okay, so everything between the ears. The other key component to that is a lot of those martial arts, dance, gymnastics, ironically enough, all of their participants are doing that sport barefoot.
Which we're going to get into.
and the bare feet is a really integral component to it as well, because it's also a very epicenter of all this sensory input that essentially tells our brain how to move our body, right? So those are kind of the key, like the foundational pathways that we see the parents putting their kids in to have a much better chance later in life. And I work with an NFL veteran. He's a 10-year NFL vet. Was a lineman actually for the Chiefs, the Patriots, and the Chiefs, Patriots, and Eagles. And he's an offensive guard tackle and kind of on the smaller side. When I say small, I mean he's still like 6'5", 300 and some pounds when he played, but that was a smaller side for a lineman. And he really excelled in the NFL, not because of his size and strength, but it was his footwork and his handwork, because he did nothing but like boxing and mixed martial arts growing up. And then all of a sudden got into high school and played football, like 15, 16 years old, and found out, hey, I could use all this big size to an advantage. And by the way, I'm really good with my hands. That's going to set you apart. Right?
Yep. So if you're listening in, you have kids, and you're trying to think about what sports to get them into at a young age, wrestling, martial arts, gymnastics.
Dance. Keep that in there too, right?
And don't forget about dance. I'm actually curious because we're going to get into the whole barefoot conversation. Yeah, sure. I think you've got, like I said, that's going to blow people's minds about what the power of actually being barefoot as much as possible can do for you. I'm going to ask a baseball question though, because you got me thinking when you're talking about movements and the fluidity of movements defining the real athlete, right? Is there any science behind why left-handed hitters often tend to have the sweetest swings? That left-handed swing looks so much more fluid than, say, a right-handed swing. Is there any science behind that? I was just curious.
You know what? I don't actually know of any direct science. I'm going to try and bullshit an answer for you, though. I'm just going to try and connect some dots, because When you look at the difference between a right-handed swing and a left-handed swing, the only thing that you're changing is the forward leg, essentially, right? That's going to direct the force. And we know that like ambidextrous hitters, ambidextrous throwers are way more valuable because I believe, and this is going to go back to the whole like balance piece of the program here, is that they're utilizing way more of their body, right? They have way more movement availability or movement options, and I kind of term that as mobility, and not mobility in the sense of like range of motion, but they have different options they could use that are more robust than say just somebody who can only swing right-handed, right? And so I think that you're able to coordinate a lot more neuromuscularly maybe inside the system, and it does make that more fluid and more seamless and more effortless looking. But now you got me thinking. I'm gonna have to go research this one now. Thanks, Andy, for the.
I was just curious because you think about that, right?
Free time I have.
All the sweetest swingers in baseball have always been left-handed.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's something to be said about that behind the science of the movement of a left-handed swing. So let's talk about this though. We were down in Scottsdale. First morning that we're all there. I'm in the gym. In walks this guy I haven't met yet. All right, we just met the night before, and you're barefoot. And I have to admit, my first reaction was, dude, you're barefoot in the gym. Like, you don't do that. But let's talk about that because really, what you had us walk through in that workshop we did, having us barefoot, talk about that. Why is it so important that we do as many things barefoot as we can? What's the importance behind that?
Well, I think we first need to tackle the myth of being barefoot in a gym as being uncleanly. It's like a no-no. Because, culturally, that's the situation, right?
And you have said you've been yelled at gyms. Hey, buddy, get your shoes on.
Oh, yeah. And then I have to, essentially punch him in the face with knowledge bombs of, hey, listen, that research-wise, it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense. Even if you just think about it from a common sense standpoint, if you're okay, let's just say we take the majority of people who are in shoes all day long. If your feet are inside the shoes, they are contacting a lot less external bacteria and nasty stuff outside and inside bathrooms and everything like that, and then tracking it into the gym, right? It's why martial arts studios and yogi studios all have you take your shoes off before you get in, right? Because they keep that space clean and pristine. If we did the same thing with gyms, we wouldn't really have much of a problem. And another interesting tidbit about that is the only reason why our feet smell is because we're growing bacteria inside the shoes all day long if we never let them air out. Yeah. So it actually is cleaner to be inside of a gym barefoot than it is with other shoes as you're tracking all that nasty garbage from where you've been last. So anyway, that's the cleanliness piece aside, but there are essentially two major reasons why training barefoot is so important. Number one, from a sensory input standpoint, okay, going more after the neurological system, how it's affecting the brain, and then two, biomechanically, meaning how it is taking energy that's being stored from ground reaction forces and gravity, how it's sending that energy up the rest of the chain of the body, so into the hip and into the low back, and then if you're a thrower and you're a pitcher, taking it from the left leg into the right hand to release the ball. It's all directed through the feet. And I'll tell a quick little backstory because I think people might find this interesting. I'm not actually sure if I shared this story with you guys in Scottsdale or not, but when I was playing baseball as a catcher, right, and for a long time, I never knew what it was like to squat with my heels down because I was constantly on my toes. All right. And I was in cleats from the age of 4. All right. To put that into perspective, my body is still developing. And us males, we actually develop later into life. I actually graduated high school at 5'10", 170. And then I didn't reach 6'1", 205 until my sophomore year of college. So kind of a late bloomer, so to speak. I really wish Dad would have held me back a year, put me ahead because of the smarts and the intelligence. Damn you, Dad. Could have been so much better. Anyway, so I was in these cleats for a long time, could never put my heel down when I squatted. And then I get done with my baseball career, which ended in high school. I didn't go anywhere past that. And shit, my feet really hurt. And I had all this knee pain, this Achilles tendonitis stuff, this one-sided low back pain, shoulder issues, and all that. And it wasn't until I got into PT school and started putting the pieces together that I realized that the foot is just like any other part of the body. Like, if you want to grow your biceps, you could strengthen the biceps. If you want to strengthen the feet and make your feet more mobile, well, you can do that too. It's still a body part, right? And that's kind of where I began my movement journey with restoring my feet and waking up my feet to normal movement and going barefoot. And to make a long story short, I essentially over a 3-year time period went from a size 12.5 shoe to a size 10.5 shoe, because I took my feet, which were essentially flipped out to the side like duck feet and flippers. I essentially wobbled my way through life and restored the arch, restored more mobility to it, and made them work in a way that they were actually benefiting my body. They became stronger. They actually got more blood flow. There became more color back to the foot. You actually see veins that were developing. And I'll never forget the first compliment that I got from my feet, Andy. It was great, man. It's like, everybody's like, oh, you got such a great 6-pack, or your arms are huge. Like, how much do you bench? And I got the comment on my feet that my feet look muscular. I'm like, oh, I finally made it. This is it, right? All this work that I've been doing for so long. And it's possible. It takes some time, and it takes having an understanding of how your feet actually function. So if we look at this from a biomechanical standpoint, we'll start there. Your feet are meant to be very mobile. They're meant to be very dexterous like our hands. The only problem is that we put them inside all the this rubber and leather all day long that I call foot prisons, like they're shoe prisons. We keep them all enclosed and they can't move. Okay, so your feet, your foot, or the foot itself, is supposed to be able to go through an excursion of movement, meaning it's supposed to be able to flatten out completely into this pronation shape where everything kind of lowers to the ground and spreads out. Think about like the toes splaying out like my fingers are, and then into a supinated shape, which is what everybody perceives as a healthy foot, like having that high arch component to it where the middle of the foot is lifting up off the ground, and it's creating this rigid lever that we could use for energy transfer. The thing is, though, is that neither is good nor bad. Flat feet pronation is not the boogeyman, right? It really isn't, okay? Whereas the high arch is not the gold standard. It's our ability to be able to move through them and between them that actually matters. Like, I don't care if you have a nice looking arch. If you can't move out of it, you're going to have another host of problems compared to somebody that has a lower ground, like a lower arch that they're stuck in. Okay. And I have naturally flatter feet architecturally, but I can move. I can transition between them. And what that does is allows for energy absorption that we talked about. So we are able to yield to gravity better and absorb load. And then that rigid lever, that supination shape, allows us to be able to transfer that throughout the rest of the body efficiently. If we can't, so if we're stuck in any one of those two positions, we are going to overload joints, parts of the joints, overload parts of the tissues inside of our lower body specifically that are going to cause this overload, this overstress phenomenon that leads to a lot of the chronic pain and injuries that we see in not only today's athletes, but even in the general gym goer, right? So like here's an example, one of the worst things you could do is take somebody who has a very high arch and it makes them like really lateral chain dominant, meaning they predominantly use the outside portion of their body. So think outside portion of your calf, up into your hip, into your low back. It's all part of the same chain. And then you had them squat and drive their knees out, which is that's the common cue that most people see in gyms. This goes back to the component of, are you exercising or are you moving? Because if you're just moving unconsciously because somebody told you to do it like that, you're not really moving, you're just exercising, right? And that caused a lot of issues because your foot can't flatten out, which allows the whole entire lower system to internally rotate. So the flattening allows for internal rotation of the lower leg, internal rotation of the femur, the upper leg, okay, which then puts all your glutes onto a nice three-dimensional stretch to be able to explode powerfully out of that bottom position. If we are constantly trying to drive our knees out and create that supposed good shape of a foot of an arch, you're never allowing your body to actually succumb and yield to gravity and load the tissues appropriately to get the quick neuromuscular reaction to move appropriately out of the bottom. So you're essentially pressing the accelerator and pulling the parking brake at the same time. You're going against what the brain, you're trying to override what the brain is naturally trying to do. And that's where we get into the whole ego component. Like, we're kind of naive to think that we're smarter than our bodies. It's not the case. And like, when I do with people, essentially just give them the opportunities to listen to their body, actually tune inward, create this level of attunement so they can understand what's going on and just allow it to happen and work with it rather than trying to over control it. Okay, so that's like the first biomechanical piece. So if the foot can't move appropriately, we're going to have dysfunctional patterns up the rest of the chain in a myriad of different ways and different fires that need to be put out. And that's the interesting piece with all the physical therapy stuff too, is a lot of PTs and chiros and athletic trainers end up spending 99% of their time chasing all these fires, chasing all the pain around, because they're never looking at the source of the problem, which we could dive into that too if you want to in a little bit. But then the second component, this is actually the more important piece, is the sensory aspect, right? So I talked about earlier how all these mixed martial arts and gymnastics programs and dance, they have everybody barefoot, right? Because our feet have a very specific type of skin on the bottom of them. It's called glabre skin. Don't really need to know it. But essentially what that means is that it has the highest amount of what we call mechanoreceptors found anywhere in the body. So all these proprioceptors, remember balance and proprioception? We have the highest amount of these little sensory organelles in the bottom of our feet found anywhere in our body. Yet what do we do all day long?
Put them in shoes and socks.
Put them in shoes and socks. So the only input that they're ever receiving is the cushion of the shoe, is the cushion of the sock. They never experience what's like I'm standing on rubber right now, okay, or standing on tile or concrete or hardwood or gravel or grass. And right, we don't get, and there's a lot of components of like grounding to this as well, but we never get this sensory input into the bottom of the foot. Now that's critical, okay, because our brain has a picture representation of every single part of our body, okay? And our feet actually have a pretty small area of that brain map of that picture, okay? And I think it's because we actually enclosed them in shoes all day long, and we noticed that the brain started kind of down-regulating the importance of that map area. But when we don't stimulate the bottom of the feet like that, that map, that picture becomes really blurry. It becomes really fuzzy and unclear. So we stop devoting a lot of energy to it versus something like our hands. Hands are free all day long, right? They have a very high representation, very clear, very sharp image of that map, that picture in the brain, because we use them literally all day long to maneuver out through our environment. We feed ourselves, we comb our hair, we brush our teeth, we shake hands, like it's constantly being stimulated. But the feet, unfortunately, are not. So we start to shut that area down. Now you can imagine if we start shutting down neural capacity to the only part of our body that actually has contact with the ground. Think about that for a second. Most of us are actually just running around on essentially like pegs. Then seriously, like pirates, like pegs, rather than actual feet. We have no awareness of what our feet are doing. And I'll tell you a quick little story. I think this is important to highlight. I was working with a very high level of our nation's military a couple weeks ago, and we were doing some change of direction drills, okay, outside. And they're all wearing shoes, right? And what we ended up seeing was a lot of sloppy movement, like knees slapping back. They're kind of falling over their feet. And these are some very high level tactical athletes, right? And we're working with a bunch of us coaches, and they're kind of like yelling at me because I'm the foot guy to coach and cue these guys in their feet because they saw all these dysfunctional patterns kind of going about. I was like, listen, we can't even begin to cue these guys right now because they don't know where their feet are at. They're literally inside these moon shoes, kind of flopping around, sloshing around. They don't know where they're big. I can't tell them to drive their big toe on the ground. They don't know where it's at in relation to their body. It's not going to help them at all. So what we need to do is be able to remove the obstruction, right? The obstruction blocking the way, and start to work now with the feet to start to build this unconscious competence again and have that then translate into all their movement. That needs to be where we need to start.
When you think about, you talk about the feet were meant to be have dexterity like our hands. However, because we're wearing shoes and socks all the time, we're almost like putting blinders on those receptors that are letting our feet have that dexterity. So here's my question. This is not what I intended to ask 5 minutes ago, but I'm going to ask it. Our ancestors, the apes, the monkeys, right? Who we see them picking things up with their feet all the time and doing, is it because they have spent their entire life barefoot and have allowed their feet to maintain that same dexterity as their hands?
Yeah. So if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, right, they never enclosed their feet. So from a usefulness perspective, they had to, like, that was part of their survival. That is how they were able to procreate and pass on their genes, is the ability to use every single part of their body, including their feet, not just for, foraging and feeding themselves and walking around, hanging from trees, but even fighting. Like, have you ever seen like two gorillas go at it? It looks like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu match going on, right? And I had the opportunity to witness my very first Brazilian jiu-jitsu match too. And I noticed that a lot of the guys that won and the women that won literally got on their backs first. Think about that. They already rolled onto their back so they could put their feet up in the air. and use that as part of their guard. I'm like, this is cool. Like I love the human movement, but then I also made that connection. I'm like, that's why they're doing it, because now you got your hands and your feet to defend yourself. Right?
Yeah. So take somebody who is listening in. They go to work where they have to wear shoes and socks. Ideally, in a real life setting, Matt, what percentage of one's day should someone spend barefoot?
So obviously work is a different scenario. I know that, and I realize and understand that not everybody has the ability to take their shoes off at work, right? There are rules against that. However, we need to control what we can't control, and that's usually our home setting. Like if we could be barefoot as much as humanly possible in and around the house and stimulate the bottom of your feet with as many different surfaces as possible, you're going to start to actually wake up those sensory organelles again pretty quick. Okay, so it takes about what we call 2 to 3 weeks to develop neuromuscular efficiency. Right, essentially your brain's starting to wake these neural networks up again, and the more time that you spend, like the more capacity that you can build barefoot, the better. It's going to start to translate over into better movement. Now, I will say this: if you start going barefoot after being in shoes the majority of your day, your feet are going to get sore. Okay, they might even be a little bit painful, and that's actually okay. We want that to happen. Those are the muscles that are essentially waking up and starting to work again. And pain, the whole pain perception thing as a whole, we could spend 2 hours on that, Andy, about how your brain perceives pain and why it does and why everybody's is different. But this is something that it's vitally important for the human experience and for our movement capabilities. So it's one of those things that we need to work through in a guided fashion as well, too, so we don't kind of piss off the tissues too much.
So let's talk about this with the time we have left. You know, your business, Rooted in Movement, is founded on 5 pillars. Mm-hmm. And, you know, movement, vitality, mindset, nutrition, and training. Talk about, if you will, those 5 pillars and how, you know, one kind of feeds off the other. If we had to go through this path here of movement, vitality, mindset, nutrition, and training, mm-hmm. how can one go through that journey to basically, you know, I'll steal a phrase from your business, be rooted in movement.
That's good. Yeah, I should actually have them in like a diagram where it is a cycle in nature, because you're right. They do all completely feed off of you. And speaking of, feed off each other. And speaking of feeding, I can start the nutrition piece. Like what you put in your mouth has a dramatic effect of, one, how you feel, 2, your ability to recover, which then is going to directly affect your movement. Because, you know, if you're not feeling good and you're not moving well and you're not recovering, you're not going to want to move anymore. Like that's typically how our brains work. They'll just shut us down. And we see this with like a lot of the hard charging people who do like a high intensity workouts, like 7 days a week, twice a day. Your body's going to start to break down, and especially it'll break down even quicker if we're not giving it the right nutrients. So the hydration piece, electrolyte balance, and then eating like real food. And here's the kicker: enough protein, no matter if you're vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, it doesn't matter, but eating enough protein to sustain your regrowth, right? And then I think we have to put in one other piece with that, is the growth component, is sleep. Like if you're not sleeping, that is the greatest recovery tool that you have. That's where we release all these anabolic hormones that help you grow and recover. So you get to be putting all the work in throughout the day, but if we don't prioritize the sleep component, it's essentially like taking 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Because
you know, and I'm glad you brought that up quickly, the recovery, even in exercise, recovery and exercise, because I'm one who's guilty of most of my workouts. Sometimes I do 2 a day. Most of my workouts in the past have been intense. Yeah. And I think you really have to have that mindset that you have to be able to mix the intensity with the recovery. And right. So I've really tried to learn how to bring in, you know, whether it's a recovery run or whatever it is, you've got to take it easy. You got to let that body relax as well.
No, absolutely. And I don't want people to perceive that I'm like poo-pooing on any type of discipline, right? Like, cause if you're an endurance athlete or a triathlete, I work with Ironman competitors out here in Arizona a lot. Even if you're going into like powerlifting, weightlifting, or even any other high level sport, it's going to take some sacrifice, right? But you're going into it with the intention that you need to do these specific types of training modalities to make you good at your sport if you want to be competitive with it, right? There's a holistic way to attack it, and there's a not holistic way to attack it. And if you are neglecting the recovery piece and just trying to do more volume, you're going to run yourself into a brick wall eventually. And a great example are the Ironman athletes that I work with, because they do so much running, biking, swimming. It's a lot of volume, it's a lot of frequency, it's a lot of stress to the body, but there's one thing that they don't have that they drastically need, and that's strength, because you need the strength to be able to withstand all the training volume. So it's a trade-off, and that's why I try to get these guys into at least 2 days a week to do some structured strength workouts so they can build the capacity their tissues have to handle the heavy training volume and load that they're putting them through. And then you also need to be eating enough to sustain that amount of volume, sleeping enough to sustain that amount of volume to make you successful at that sport. So even with just like the nutrition stuff, we just hit on so many different topics of this, but then you go move into the movement piece, and that's kind of where I like to play, right? Because I view movement as play in a way, because it's all about self-discovery. Okay. And I've been down this road many, many times before myself. And I think it's kind of what makes me really good at what I do, because I jacked up my body a lot as a kid, and even into my early adult. I'm 32 right now, but even all through my 20s and all, I still experience some pain and injury, but it's just information. It's a lesson learned, right, about how we're moving our body. And if we take the time to actually listen to it and discover what it means to us and what it's telling us, we can then use it to make ourselves better and to move in a better way. And that's kind of where the movement piece comes in. Like I don't ever tell people what's going wrong with them. I have them move like you experienced out there in the grass during the mastermind of, hey, I kind of suck at going into this pattern. Okay, what does that mean about my holistic movement health, right? Because it could mean, and we can look at a good example of this, is our buddy Mike Ayala. He had all this pain on the right side of his body, right lower side of his body. And just watching him move through those couple different patterns it took him through, and he felt it. He's like, wow, I'm like way more unstable on my left side. Oh, okay. So what do you think that means to you, Mike? Oh, I guess I'm utilizing my right side more than my left. So you think that might be a problem, right? But where does everybody focus? On the right side. What if we figured out that it was the left foot and ankle that wasn't moving well, and was missing all this balance and proprioception? It was causing you to over-dominate on the right side. We're never going to put the fire out on the right until we address the left. That's the source of the problem. So that's what I use movement as, is kind of this discovery piece to help teach the individual about their bodies. And then we use that information to develop a plan into the training aspect of things that allows them to get the necessary reps in these patterns that are going to make their body more holistic in nature. It's going to help them move better with a greater breadth of movement rather than being stuck on like one end of the spectrum.
So what, I'm curious, one of your pillars is vitality. Define that for me. I think a lot of people have different perspectives on what the meaning of vitality is. As you see it in the work you do, what is vitality mean?
So I think vitality, to just sum it up, is life force energy. Okay. So do you have enough life force energy to fulfill your potential, whatever that means to you? And I think all those other components, the whole, the movement, the nutrition, the training, all of that feeds into this vitality piece, because that's the game that I play, right? I'm not about the short-term fix. I'm not about the Band-Aid that's going to get you through to the next month. I'm playing this long-term longevity and vitality card. Okay, this is the game that I think most of us really, really want, right? We want to be able to do what we're doing now, stuff that we love, stuff that we enjoy, so our passions later on in life, for as long as we possibly can. And even some of those underlying goals is like, man, I don't want to be like 70 and not be able to pick my grandkids up, right? Like, that's a problem. Or I want to golf into my 80s. Well, how can we do that? How can we set up a plan for you that allows you to then fulfill that long-term piece for as many years as possible? And that's kind of where all the movement stuff comes in. It's where all the training comes in, because we're restoring robustness in the body. We're giving you more of those mobility options to utilize, rather than just digging yourself a hole in strength and dysfunction over the years and putting yourself in this position now where you can't get up off the chair. Like, that's...
and I correct me if I'm wrong, but when I think about an athlete, we all know that has really defined your 5 pillars well, would be somebody like Tom Brady. I mean, the guy is 44 years old, still, he's on my fantasy team, so I'm very happy with his success this year, but he's still out there winning Super Bowls at age 44.
Well, okay, so here's the thing, and this Tom Brady is a great example of this. I don't much care for Tom Brady. I'm a Steelers fan.
You're from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he beat up on us a lot. And here's the thing: you cannot discount his abilities, right? You got to respect the hell out of the guy because he does pretty much everything right. Okay, so from a vitality piece, he's kind of pushing all the right buttons. And if you if you look at it, vitality can also mean like sexual longevity as well, because our fitness, if you did look at Darwinism, is our ability to procreate. So if you have any kids, like I have no kids, right? So if you have kids, you're already fitter than I am, technically, according to nature and according to Darwin. Okay, Tom Brady's got Giselle. So he's at this point, right? So he's getting his body into the most peak shape. He's making sure that it is capable of standing all of these. I mean, man, many years of playing a very, very violent, rigorous game, but then being able to go home and be a loving, caring husband as well. And probably has a pretty good sex life, I can imagine, at that point, too, because they all play into each other. And it's a very, very large component of this vitality piece. Our life force energy, especially as men, is rooted inside of our sexual energy as well.
Well, even the commercial, the Subway commercials highlight now Tom Brady and his nutrition habits and the fact he doesn't eat bread.
Come on.
We have a few minutes left, man. I want to actually ask you this question because you had a chance to go to Tokyo for the Olympics this summer,
yes,
and serve as a coach and a PT for the Olympic athletes. And when people think Olympic athletes, right, they think the fittest athletes on this planet. Now that as having a chance to work with Olympic level athletes, what are some takeaways as somebody in the world of physical therapy that you have taken away from working with some of the world's elite?
Oh man, you know what? The first thing that comes to mind, because I've worked with a bunch of different sports, a bunch of different disciplines within the Olympic stage. And my specialty, my priority is to our United States Olympic shooting athletes, because I grew up doing a lot of that in Pennsylvania as well. And I love them from a movement standpoint. And once again, we go deep down to rabbit hole of that. But the biggest commonality that we see amongst any one of these athletes, male, female, shooting athlete, swimmer, wrestler, gymnast, it doesn't matter. All of it comes down to what's going on between the ears, right? It's a mindset piece, okay? From the standpoint of all of these athletes are extremely disciplined. And the big thing that I see that even separates like the cream of the crop of the Olympians at gold medal, silver medal compared to ones that don't place, it comes down to their process orientation. Like they are so process oriented. You can put Tom Brady in this category, I think, as well too, is that they're so process oriented that they are hitting all the right buttons. They are comprising that entire rooted in movement mindset piece where they're touching on every aspect of their life that can make them good at what they're great at what they do. And it's really interesting because we take that back to the whole competency model. They are really unconsciously competent, right? To the point of so much success. But then it comes down to the point that they're putting in the reps, right? They're doing what's necessary, not making excuses. And they have a lot of confidence, not only in their bodies, which I think is like the foundational level. Like if you're confident in your body, you know it's going to withstand the rigors of the sport, you're already leagues above the rest. And people are thinking, oh shit, is my body going to hold up during this match or during this game? And then it comes down to the piece of the stress, right? How well do you manage stress? And because I've seen, especially shooting athletes who will shoot a perfect score throughout the entire match and then go to the final and implode. Well, why is that? It's nothing like there was mechanically wrong with you. It came down to the fact that you got in your own way because you got in your head and once again started overanalyzing, overthinking like I was doing with my golf swing, right? So I think a lot of this can then be tied back to that movement piece and why we do so much with movement exploration and bringing a lot of variety into their training plans, because it does create a stressor inside of a controlled environment they can then work through and problem solve. Because when I work with somebody, I don't give them the solution. I give them point A, I give them point B, and I ask them to figure out a way to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, now that we've just frustrated every guy that's listening into this episode because they're like, all right, guys, this is great, but I'm not Tom Brady. I don't have Giselle as my wife. I'm not an Olympic athlete. You know what you just said though applies to business as much as it does life. You
Oh
know, it's
yes.
you look at the people who are ultra successful in business. What is it? It's mindset, it's discipline, it's putting the reps in, and
Mhm.
it's when you get into stressful situations, it's not imploding.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it applies to so much in life.
And that's what I mentioned to all you guys when I got you all in that circle out there. It was actually a brisk, chilly morning, and they just like watered the lawn. So I have you all out there barefoot, and our feet are freezing. It was great. Sensory input, right? That was a great learning moment. But we're out there. I had you all in the circle, and we made that analogy, right? We're all hard chargers, go getters, super successful in business, and we have great intentions from our movement practice. Like we're dedicated. We know we want to be healthy. We want to live a long, healthy life. But it comes down to being able to be more aware of what's going on inside your body, because we put on the blinders, right, in business, because we get in a very specific routine. We know what works for us. We know what makes us money, and we keep taking that path. And with movement, it's a little bit different. Like we need to be able to figure out what's going on inside the body, to listen to the body more, so we can understand what it's telling us. And then if you think about that from a business standpoint, like if you're moving better and you got more confident in your body, even from a posturing standpoint, you're gonna be more proud, shoulders gonna be back, you're gonna be peacocking, and you're gonna be more successful in life and business, because people are gonna respect you. It's an energy thing. Like we're always transmitting some type of energy information to those around us. And essentially you have a choice. You could be thinking about how much your body aches, how much your body hurts, and you're going to feel disheveled, you're going to feel smaller, you're going to change your body posture, versus, man, I feel fucking great. Like I just had a great workout this morning. My body's moving well. My joints feel nice and loose and limber. It's going to be a great fucking day. And that means a lot different when you're walking down the street and like you can feel the ground beneath your feet, because you trained to be barefoot and you're wearing minimalist shoes, right? And that's sending that information, and your brain's on, it's supercharged, your diaphragm's relaxed, you're not in a sympathetic state, you're more of this parasympathetic rest and digest and relax. You can make clear, critical decisions and not get caught in the chaos, the chaos that is society these days.
So let's wrap up here. This has been a phenomenal conversation. So thank you for taking the time to be on today. If somebody's listening in, Matt, and again, we know that you work with Olympic athletes, you work with military personnel, professional athletes, you name it, but you also work with the guy running his business, the mother who's a soccer mom with 2 kids playing sports. How can somebody, even if they're not in Scottsdale, Arizona, work with you?
Great question. So that's actually one of the largest parts of my business, is this remote health coaching platform. It's like a telehealth service where we can work through all these movement problems virtually and online. And we do this through through learning about our body through movement and having to video yourself, right? So I have a very specific set of movements, and we kind of tailor this based on what you're looking for. But you essentially video yourself moving. I get those videos, I analyze them, I pick you apart in a very loving, graceful way, of course, and then we do all the assessment virtually via Zoom. And that's what makes what I do so valuable, is because of that pattern recognition brain. Like being able to go through the reps myself and learn about my own body allows me to help others, and that's how I train my coaches and my other PTs with me as well, is this ability to recognize patterns and then put together an actual program that helps you move through that problem on your own. Because at the end of the day, Andy, like, I'm not going to fix you, and that's why I'm not your standard PT, right? Ironically, I went to school to be very, very good with my hands. I spent tens of thousands of dollars, more than the $300,000 I put into Duke, to learn how to be extremely good at my hands, and that's like a 10% part of my practice now. Because what you learn to realize is that it's only a small part of the pie, right? It creates a window of opportunity to help people move better. But you, the individual, you, the one inside your own body, actually has to do the fucking movement. You have to take accountability and responsibility for yourself, and actually put the reps in that are going to allow yourself to evolve from a movement practice standpoint. And that's where the accountability piece comes in, where we get on check-in calls every couple of weeks, and we make sure that you're moving in the right direction. And it is very unique, very personalized programming, because, like we said, we're all the same, but we're all different. And it's really hard to help somebody move through pain and injury if we don't actually give them specifically what their body needs and craves.
So last question, somebody's listening and they want less pain, more vitality, want their body to just feel better. What is the easiest way for them to get in touch with you?
2. So currently website is going under a rehaul right now. So that's going to be up and running in a couple of weeks. to make it more user friendly. But email and Instagram are a great way to contact me. Matthew at rootedinmovement.com. Movement is an acronym, though, as we've been talking about. It's MVMNT. So no vowels in there, folks. Or just hit me up on Instagram at Rooted in Movement.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for joining us today. You know, I learned a lot when you realized that, you know, my body was giving me a lot of signals that was telling me that I could be doing so much more to be that definition of a true athlete. So I want to thank you for the clinic, and I want to thank you for what you shared today, because I'm sure you've opened a lot of eyes to people who thought they were doing well, but now they're like, man, there's so much more I got to do to take care of my body. So thank you again for your time.
Yes, thank you, Andy. This has been a pleasure. I love being able to share my passion with as many people.
Yeah, and you definitely show it. So we're grateful for that. And if you're listening in, hey, I hope this gave you some confidence and clarity to realize that vitality has a whole different definition, and your body is telling you, your body's letting you know what it means to be successful. You got to start listening to it. So go make it happen today, guys. Have a great day.